General Hospital spoilers for Friday, January 9th reveal that Trina and Kai had spent weeks circling around the truth, trying to convince themselves that the nightmare unfolding in Port Charles could still be contained, that the violence surrounding Drew's shooting was just another unsolved mystery the PCPD would eventually piece together. But the moment Joe completed the phone verification and matched the suspicious outgoing call to Michael's private number, a number that was never meant to appear on any records, everything they believed began to collapse. Joe wasn't supposed to be involved. He had stumbled onto the truth by accident, tracing a digital imprint that should have been impossible. And when he showed Trina and Kai the results, both of them felt the floor shift beneath their feet. The cold confirmation of that number didn't just hint at involvement. It exposed a terrifying new reality. The shooter's identity was no longer a theory. It was a fact. And the weight of that fact crushed the last remnants of denial they had been clinging to. Trina felt her chest tighten as she stared at the screen, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She had always believed Michael was hiding something, but she never imagined it would connect him so directly to the crime. Kai, standing beside her, felt a different kind of shock, one born from the realization that the truth they had uncovered would destroy lives no matter how they handled it. They couldn't unsee it, couldn't pretend Gio's confirmation was a glitch or a misunderstanding. The call came from Michael's phone. The shooter had used that phone, and if Michael wasn't the one pulling the trigger, then he had been close enough to the person who did to hide them, protect them, or worse, instruct them. The revelation forced Trina and Kai into a corner where morality clashed violently with loyalty. They knew what the system required: report the evidence, turn everything over to the PCPD, let the justice machine operate the way it was designed. But both of them also knew reality rarely matched what justice demanded. If they came forward, Michael would be destroyed, Willow would collapse, and the already fragile Quartermain and Corinthos networks would ignite a war that could swallow Port Charles whole. If they stayed silent, they would become part of the cover-up, accessories to a crime that had already spiraled too far out of control. The choice between duty and safety blurred until neither option looked survivable. Kai kept replaying the details, the timing of the call, the location pings, the missing minutes in Michael's alibi, the frantic patterns of his recent behavior. Every piece fit perfectly to ignore. Trina, however, was haunted by a different vision, the image of Scout's terrified eyes. Her trembling voice the night she tried to explain that things got complicated. Trina could feel it now. The chilling overlap between Michael's phone records and Scout's panic. Something had happened between them. Something dark enough that Michael had taken on the burden of hiding the truth, even if doing so meant letting the wrong people take the fall. As the reality settled in, Trina and Kai both felt the same terrifying shift. This wasn't just a crime. It was a chain reaction. And now they were part of it. The pressure intensified as Joe, unaware of the emotional hurricane he had triggered, asked the question that would force Trina and Kai to confront the inevitable. What do we do with this? His voice was innocent, but his eyes weren't. He knew something was wrong. He sensed the danger. And even though he didn't understand the depth of the secret he had dragged into the light, he knew enough to recognize that telling the truth could endanger them all. Kai tried to speak, but the words stuck to his throat. Trina stepped forward, her mind racing through every possible consequence, every life this revelation would shatter. She thought of Portia. She thought of Curtis. She thought of the Corinthos family, of the PCPD, of Drew recovering in a fog of confusion while the entire city fractured around him. But most of all, she thought of Scout caught in the center of something no child should ever have been touched by. If Michael had taken the blame for someone else, if he had allowed suspicion to fall on innocent people to keep the truth buried, then the real story wasn't about guilt. It was about protection. And the question Trina and Kai now faced was whether they were willing to destroy that protection. In the name of justice, the decision weighed on them like a storm cloud ready to burst. The more they thought about it, the further the consequences stretched far beyond Drew's shooting, far beyond Michael's role, reaching into every corner of Port Charles, where lies had been built upon more lies. Trina knew this was the kind of secret that could tear families apart. Kai knew this was the kind of truth that could get someone killed. Yet doing nothing felt just as dangerous. Silence had a cost, and they were already paying it. In the quiet tension of that moment, both of them realized there was no safe path forward. Whatever they chose, they would be stepping into a war they didn't ask for and had no power to control. But the truth was out now. Joe had seen it. Kai had confirmed it. Trina had felt it in her bones. And no amount of fear, loyalty, or self-preservation could erase the fact that the identity of the shooter had been exposed. And it wasn't going back into the shadows. What happened next would define everything: their futures, their relationships, their place in Port Charles. And neither of them could shake the horrifying understanding that the moment they chose a side, The consequences would echo far beyond anything they were prepared to face. The truth had been confirmed and there was no turning back. Jason and Carly hadn't expected their path to collide with Drew in a way that would shift the balance of everything they thought they understood. But the moment they saw him, tense shoulders, sharp eyes, that strange quiet anger vibrating under his skin, they both felt it. Something inside Drew had changed. Not gradually, not subtly, violently. And the confrontation that unfolded between them was nothing like the controlled arguments or tense disagreements they had managed in the past. This time, there was something darker behind Drew's gaze, something unpredictable, something that made Jason pause in a way he almost never did. Carly felt it too. The man standing in front of them wasn't the Drew they had fought beside, forgiven, protected, or argued with. This version of him radiated a sense of simmering control, dangerous, brittle, and chilled by resentment. It wasn't just anger, it was ownership. It was the feeling of a man who believed he had been wronged by everyone, and was now reclaiming the narrative by force. And that shift, that cold confidence, made Jason's instincts sharpen with a sudden, familiar clarity. Their encounter began with words, but it didn't stay there. Drew moved like someone who had rehearsed every sentence, every accusation, every justification in the dark of his own mind. He spoke of betrayal, of secrets, of responsibilities that had been taken from him. He spoke as if he were the only one who had suffered, the only one allowed to feel the weight of what had happened. And the more he talked, the more Jason recognized something he had hoped to never see. The beginning of obsession. Drew no longer seemed concerned about the truth behind the shooting, or the chaos ripping through Port Charles. He was fixated on control of his story, of his family, of the consequences spiraling around him. And that obsession, Jason realized, was pushing Drew into territory neither of them had ever expected him to cross. Jason tried to de-escalate, but Drew wasn't listening. Carly stepped forward with her usual mix of compassion and fire, but even she couldn't reach him. His anger wasn't directed at them specifically. It was directed at the world. But they were the unfortunate mirrors reflecting back the reality he refused to face. And when Drew began hinting that he knew more than he should about Michael, about Scout, about the investigation, Jason felt the first real jolt of fear. Not fear for himself. Fear of what Drew was capable of becoming. Because the darkness sliding into Drew's voice didn't feel like temporary frustration. It felt like a transformation. A shift in his entire worldview. A corruption born not from malice but from isolation, guilt, and the crushing weight of secrets he wasn't built to carry. Drew had always been the moral one, the stable one. The man who believed in justice even if justice was flawed. But now he was talking like someone who intended to take matters into his own hands. Someone who no longer trusted the system. Someone who might burn Port Charles to the ground if it meant reclaiming what he believed was his. Jason saw it in the way Drew's eyes flicked between him and Carly, calculating, suspicious, wounded. He saw how Drew no longer viewed him as a brother, but as a threat, a rival, an obstacle. And that realization cut deeper than Jason expected. They had already survived years of rivalry, memory loss, emotional chouse, but this was different. This wasn't about identity anymore. This was about survival. Carly felt the tension thickening between the two men, and for a moment, she feared Jason might react with the same intensity she was seeing in Drew. But Jason held steady. He didn't raise his voice, didn't step forward, didn't take the bait. Instead, he watched Drew with the quiet patience of someone who knew exactly how dangerous a man could become when pushed too far. He wasn't angry, he was assessing, and Drew seemed to sense it. The temperature in the room dropped as Drew's expression shifted from hostile to defensive, as though he was suddenly aware that Jason was reading him too clearly. That realization only made Drew more erratic. He began speaking faster, accusing them of hiding things, of betraying him, of standing between him and the justice he deserved. His breathing quickened, his thoughts tangled. His anger spiraled until it became clear that Drew wasn't simply upset, he was unraveling. And yet beneath that unraveling, there was a new kind of power. A dangerous determination. A willingness to cross lines he once refused to even approach. Jason stepped forward with the calm of a man preparing for the worst. And Carly realized in that moment that she had lost the ability to mediate between them. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than her voice. Bigger than her history with either man. Bigger than the fractured friendships and loyalty that tied them together. Because now, Drew wasn't just in conflict with Jason. He was becoming the kind of enemy Jason had spent his entire life fighting. Not by choice, not from evil, but from a darkness that bubbled up when a man felt cornered by fate, guilt, and a truth too painful to accept. By the time the confrontation ended, nothing was resolved. No peace was restored. No trust reborn. Instead, something far more dangerous had rooted itself in the space between the three of them, a fracture. A deep, spreading crack that threatened to shatter what was left of the bond between Jason and Drew. And that fracture wouldn't heal. It would grow. It would fester. It would pull them into opposite sides of a conflict that neither of them saw coming. But both of them were now trapped in. As Jason walked away from Drew that night, Carly could see it in his expression. A new anxiety. A new determination. A new fear that Drew's darkness might already be too deep to pull him out of. And Drew, watching them leave, felt something else entirely, a chilling certainty that Jason was now part of the problem, part of the threat, part of the enemy. It was the beginning of a war neither of them wanted, but one that was already taking shape in the shadows. And no one in Port Charles was ready for where it would lead. Laura entered her meeting with Sunny expecting tension, but she didn't expect the entire ground beneath Port Charles to shift the moment Kevin stepped through the door carrying a file, as if it were radioactive. His expression alone made the air tighten. The kind of look that belonged to a man who had just uncovered something so dangerous. It changed the meaning of every conversation, every alliance, every threat they thought they understood about Sidwell. Laura didn't need words to know. Kevin had crossed into the darkest part of Sidwell's psychological profile. The part even the WSB refused to document fully. And when he placed the file down and exhaled like someone bracing for fallout, Laura felt a quiet shiver race through her spine. Because she knew the truth was about to reshape everything. Kevin revealed that Sidwell, for all his violence and careful planning, carried a fatal emotional weakness, a fracture in his identity. A psychological wound that destabilized him whenever pressure hit too close to his core. Sidwell had built an empire out of intimidation, manipulation, and fear. But it was all constructed around a fragile emotional nerve he had spent years burying under power and blood. The revelation was not comforting, it was horrifying. A man like Sidwell could handle physical threats, political pressure, even assassination attempts. But emotional destabilization was different. It made him unpredictable, volatile, capable of turning against his own allies in blind, destructive spirals. Laura realized instantly that this was not simply a strategic advantage, it was a warning. The more Sidwell felt cornered by Brennan, by Britt's hesitations, by Jason's quiet encroaching presence, the closer he drifted toward a psychological rupture. Sunny absorbed the information with a chilling stillness, the kind that signaled calculation rather than shock. He understood what this meant better than anyone. A perfectly controlled enemy was manageable, even if powerful. A wounded one, operating on fear and obsession, was catastrophic. Kevin explained that Sidwell's weakness was tied to a specific person living in Port Charles. Someone who unknowingly triggered a deeply embedded emotional conflict. The identity wasn't publicly known, but the implications were immediate. Sidwell's behavior was becoming more reckless, more emotionally charged, more fueled by desperation. Every violent outburst, every irrational threat, every risky move he had made in recent weeks suddenly aligned into a terrifying pattern. Sidwell was losing control of himself. Laura tried to keep her composure, but she could feel the city slipping into the jaws of something far more dangerous than organized crime or political corruption. This was psychological warfare driven by a man whose mind was fracturing under pressure. Sunny felt it too, the heaviness of an incoming storm that could not be avoided. His instinct sharpened into something fierce, protective, and uncompromising because now the danger extended beyond the WSB, beyond Dalton's murder, beyond Britt's torture. This was the kind of threat that could swallow entire families, entire institutions, even the fragile stability of Port Charles. Kevin warned that exposing Sidwell's weakness could have explosive consequences. If the wrong person triggered the fracture, Sidwell wouldn't retreat, he would detonate, dragging down anyone standing between him and whatever twisted sense of control he was trying to reclaim. Laura understood instantly that they weren't just facing a criminal, they were facing a psychological bomb, and the countdown had already started. She thought of Britt, barely holding herself together under Sidwell's demands. She thought of Brennan, exploiting the chaos for his own rise. She thought of Jason, whose calm presence in this war made him the only person capable of confronting Sidwell head-on. She thought of Portia, unknowingly edging close to danger she couldn't see, and she understood that the entire city was connected to Sidwell's unraveling, in ways no one had predicted. Sunny, meanwhile, was already shifting into battle mode, recognizing that he needed to protect not just his own circle but the city itself. Sidwell's weakness wasn't a gift, it was a spark. If someone lit it, intentionally or not, Port Charles would burn. The office felt smaller as the weight of Kevin's discovery settled over them, and Laura realized they no longer had the luxury of waiting for Sidwell's next move. He was already cracking, already panicking beneath the surface, already closer to violence than any of them had imagined. And the most terrifying part was knowing that Sidwell himself had no idea how close he was to losing control. In that moment, Laura, Sunny, and Kevin understood the truth that would define everything coming next. Sidwell wasn't simply a threat, he was a collapse in progress. And when a monster collapses, it doesn't fall quietly. It destroys everything on the way down. Port Charles was standing on the edge of something catastrophic, and the first tremor had already struck. The real shock was still on its way. Tracy had never been known for subtlety, but the sharpness in her voice when she confronted Alexis cut through the room like a blade, slicing away every pretense of civility until only raw accusation remained. What began as a disagreement spiraled into something far more venomous. Because Tracy could feel the shift, Alexis wasn't merely defending Willow, or navigating the legal maze surrounding Drew's shooting. She was manipulating it, twisting it, controlling it. And Tracy, with her instincts sharpened by decades of family chaos, sensed an ulterior motive pulsing beneath every word Alexis spoke. The moment she realized Alexis might be setting traps for Michael, her fury erupted. To Tracy, Michael was many things: flawed, stubborn, reckless, but he was still family. And anyone who threatened her family triggered the cold, territorial anger that defined her. She saw through the polished professionalism, through the calm logic, through the legal righteousness Alexis liked to wrap herself in. All Tracy saw was a woman engineering a narrative piece by piece, subtly guiding suspicion toward Michael, not because the evidence demanded it, but because Alexis needed it. And that realization ignited an obsession inside Tracy. A relentless need to expose exactly what Alexis was doing, before the consequences swallowed the entire Quartermain family. Tracy argued that Alexis wasn't searching for truth, she was shaping it. Every legal maneuver, every point to question, every strategic silence felt less like advocacy and more like a calculated attempt to corner Michael. Tracy's anger wasn't rooted in fear of the law but in fear of the invisible threads Alexis was weaving around her grandson. She could sense the trap forming even if she couldn't yet see its outline. And the more Alexis denied it, the more Tracy became convinced that something darker was unfolding beneath the surface. Alexis, meanwhile, carried herself with a frightening kind of calm, the kind that comes from someone who believes they are justified in every step, every risk, every manipulation. She claimed she wanted justice. She insisted she believed in Willow's innocence. But Tracy saw the cracks in that story. She saw how Alexis flinched when pressed about motive, how her voice tightened when Scout was mentioned, how her arguments shifted depending on who she was speaking to. Tracy recognized obsession when she saw it, and Alexis was drowning in one. It wasn't simply about Willow's innocence. It wasn't even about Drew's shooting. It was about control. Control over the case, control over the narrative, and worst of all, control over Scout's future. Tracy sensed that Alexis was willing to do anything: bend the law, distort the truth, manipulate Michael's actions to create an outcome that placed Scout back in her orbit. And that, to Tracy, was unforgivable. The clash between them grew more volatile with every passing hour. Tracy accused, Alexis deflected. Tracy pushed, Alexis sharpened her composure like armor. And beneath it all, a new darkness thickened in the air. A tension fueled not by logic, but by two women protecting what they believed was theirs. For Tracy, it was family. For Alexis, it was redemption through custody and control. What neither woman spoke aloud but both understood was that the real danger wasn't the argument itself. It was the shadow forming behind the conflict, the possibility that Alexis truly was setting Michael up for a fall. Tracy couldn't shake the image of Alexis quietly maneuvering her legal influence, slowly steering the case toward an outcome where Michael appeared guilty or desperately unstable. An outcome that would force the court to reevaluate Scout's custody arrangements. An outcome that benefited Alexis more than anyone else. That idea consumed Tracy, turning her anger into a relentless fixation. She began watching Alexis differently: every gesture, every hesitation, every calculated word. The more she examined, the more convinced she became that Alexis wasn't fighting for justice. She was fighting for control. And the truth that frightened Tracy most was that Alexis was good at it, terrifyingly good. Smart, experienced, articulate, emotionally driven yet externally calm. Alexis knew exactly how to manipulate the legal system without appearing manipulative. She knew how to frame suspicion without explicitly accusing. She knew how to guide investigators subtly enough that no one questioned her motives. And Tracy knew that once Alexis locked onto a desired outcome, she didn't stop. Ever. The obsession brewing between them was no longer simple rivalry. It was a looming war. A war of strategy, narrative, and psychological pressure. And the center of that war wasn't Drew, or Michael, or even Willow. It was Scout, a child caught between two women who would reshape the law itself to protect her or claim her. As Tracy stormed away, her anger burning beneath her skin, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: Alexis was hiding something. And Tracy, who had spent a lifetime tearing open family secrets, was ready to rip this one apart too. But deep in her gut, She also felt something far more unsettling. Alexis's calm wasn't just confidence. It was a calm of someone who believed she was already winning. And that realization sent a chill through Tracy that even her fury couldn't silence. Britt woke up knowing today would not be like any other day. Because the pressure she had been carrying for weeks had reached a breaking point. The fear, the guilt, the coercion. The secrets forced into her veins like poison, all of it had grown too heavy to contain. And when she said that today she might finally reveal everything, she wasn't exaggerating. She felt it deep in her bones. This was a moment where silence would either kill her or transform her. For the first time since Sidwell pulled her into his twisted web, Britt realized she could no longer survive by hiding. Everything she had tried to swallow, every threat, every unspoken plea, every physical tremor she pretended was nerves instead of neurological decay, was rising to the surface, demanding to be seen. And only one person in Port Charles had both the instinct and the discipline to carry that truth, without letting it destroy her: Jason. The thought of confessing everything to him terrified her. Not because she feared Jason's judgment. Jason didn't judge, but because she feared what her confession would unleash. Jason was controlled, lethal, and quietly relentless when someone he cared about was threatened. Britt had seen what he was capable of in moments of crisis, but this would be different. This wouldn't be Jason saving her from a single threat. This would be Jason stepping into a war with enemies who didn't follow rules, didn't believe in mercy, and didn't hesitate to kill. And yet, Britt also knew that withholding the truth was no longer an option. Sidwell's desperation was escalating. Brennan was tightening his grip. The WSB was circling like a silent predator watching its prey weaken. Britt felt herself losing control not just of her circumstances, but of her body. The medication Sidwell provided was beginning to feel like a leash, a chain he could yank at any moment. She couldn't live like this, afraid of every phone call, every shadow, every footstep on the hospital floor. Britt needed someone to break the cycle, and Jason was the only person capable of shattering the darkness without hesitating. This realization pushed her to the edge of a precipice she had been avoiding for far too long. She replayed their last encounter in her mind: Jason's steady voice, the way his eyes narrowed with concern when he sensed she was lying, the subtle tension in his posture that revealed he already knew something was terribly wrong. Jason had always been able to read her, even when she tried to hide behind sarcasm or anger or empty reassurances. He saw through the shield she built, and for the first time, Britt saw that as a lifeline rather than a threat. The weight on her chest loosened slightly as a decision solidified. She would tell him, not part of the truth, not the watered-down version she had fed to others, the whole truth. The truth about what Sidwell had done, what Brennan had orchestrated, what she had witnessed, what she had been forced to hide, and what she feared was coming next. She knew the moment she spoke the words, the world around her would change. Jason would act. Jason would retaliate. Jason would protect. And Jason would not stop. That was what scared Britt the most, not the violence that would follow, but the transformation she knew it would trigger inside him. Jason had been trying to stay in the shadows, in control, away from the moral gray that had defined his earlier life. But once Britt confessed, he would no longer have that luxury. Her truth would drag him back into the cold, methodical version of himself, the version capable of dismantling an entire power structure, just to save one person. Britt felt the shift already forming, the ripple of change stretching across the city without anyone noticing it yet. Today wasn't just the day she might confess. Today was the day the entire path of this war would bend. Once she opened her mouth, alliances would break, new enemies would rise, and Port Charles would be dragged into a darkness deeper than any of them had anticipated. But for the first time in weeks, Britt felt something that almost resembled relief. Because once she told Jason the truth, she wouldn't be fighting alone anymore. Jason would take the burden, the danger, the consequences, and he would do it without ever asking for anything in return. And as Britt exhaled slowly, preparing herself for what was coming, she knew with chilling certainty that her confession would not just change her life. It would change Jason. It would change the war. It would change Port Charles. Today, Britt wasn't just revealing the truth. Today, she was lighting the fuse.